Today, we'll be talking about the AI shopping revolution and what it means for your brand. And if you can go to the next slide, my name is Madison Brissot, and I lead product marketing at Evertune. I'll be moderating today's session, and we are joined by Ed Chater, our Chief Product Officer and co-founder at Evertune, as well as Will Robinson, our AI Insights Editor. So, agenda for today, we have a lot to pack in 30 minutes, which is why we're starting quickly. We'll first set the framework for the state of AI shopping today, and then we'll discuss the key players in the space that are building out what we're calling the new digital shelf. We'll then have Will walk us through the data and insights that we've put together about ChatGPT shopping. And lastly, we'll discuss what action steps you can take to improve your product's visibility in AI shopping. So one quick housekeeping before we dive in. We have a Q&A option in the Zoom where you can start to ask questions and upvote other attendees' questions. We'll try to get to these questions throughout the session or if we have some time at the end. So feel free to ask questions, and if we don't get to them, we will find a way to get back to you. So without further ado, Ed, let's begin. Can you walk us through what's been happening in the world of AI shopping?
Thank you so much, Madison. Yeah, looking forward to diving into this presentation. So I think the first thing to call out is just where we are in terms of the adoption curve here. It's still early days, but the rate of adoption and growth that is expected to happen in terms of AI shopping is enormous. And so eMarketer came out recently with an estimation of the market basically being worth 144 billion in 2029. And so that was over a 600% increase over the next 3 years. And I would say if that kind of ends up representing about 8.8% of the total e-commerce sales, I still think that's probably a little bit conservative on where we're going, given the pace of change and the pace of adoption that we're kind of seeing at the moment. So, and one of the key reasons for that is just like the user experience of shopping with AI is just tremendously enhanced. You can essentially go from having a problem and kind of asking ChatGPT, a vague kind of question, something as broad as maybe, how can I sleep better at night, through to then kind of discovering a specific brand or a specific product to basically help with that problem, through to then evaluating different products, kind of making a choice, and then ultimately kind of purchasing. And so you're seeing this like whole conversion funnel essentially collapse basically into AI. Whereas in the previous world, consumers would be bouncing between lots of different media and lots of different channels before ultimately kind of getting to that purchase. And I think we're seeing some purchases at the moment that can begin and end all within that AI conversation, which is pretty transformational. And so we like to kind of refer to some of this change as kind of this new opportunity of digital shelf space. And so as you think about the shopping offerings from ChatGPT, Gemini, and also Meta has some pieces there as well. These are kind of like this new, highly valuable digital shelf that exists in terms of like how your product turns up within those chat experiences. And given those are like general purpose AIs, that they kind of fit increasingly kind of integrate into consumers' lives in different ways and different forms. But we're also seeing e-commerce players start to kind of build out their own shopping assistants as well that live on their domain currently, but we're also starting to see that kind of shift beyond their own domain. So Amazon developed, and has Rufus live on its site that kind of is highly present. And then you also have Walmart and Sparky. And the interesting thing there is, as well, we'll kind of get into, you can now start to actually access Walmart within the ChatGPT experience, which is super interesting. And so you kind of got this whole new digital real estate to basically be thinking about how your product turns up and how you're kind of discovered across that digital shelf. Will, why don't you talk us through some of the evolution that we've seen within ChatGPT? Is like for the rest of this presentation, we're going to zone in very specifically on what ChatGPT has been doing within shopping.
Yeah, so one thing we're used to seeing with AI is a lot of change in a short amount of time, and it's definitely been true even just with ChatGPT shopping. So starting back in September was when ChatGPT announced that they were going to start offering in-chat checkout so that a person could actually complete an entire transaction without having to leave the chat. In October, we started tracking to see how often our shopping experiences actually popping up in ChatGPT. And when we were asking a bunch of shopper-like questions back in October, that was only about 8% of the time the experience was coming up. And that's not the actual checkout. That's just any kind of shopping experience where you get a product carousel of prices and star ratings. And very quickly, ChatGPT started to accelerate that trend that we were seeing. So In late November, they announced shopping research, which was to make the experience more like a personal assistant shopper. So you could ask questions and ChatGPT would ask back and try to help you guide you on that buying decision. And we saw that more kinds of prompts triggered the shopping experience that kind of broadened it out. Fast forward all the way to February, we asked the exact same questions that we had asked in October, and that trigger rate was now almost 9 out of 10. It's about out of the 9 out of 10 responses that you're asking something like a shopper would, you were getting some kind of shopping experience. Then shortly thereafter in March, there were reports that ChatGPT is going to move away entirely from the instant checkout, that they're going to rely on third parties to make the transactions. Walmart executive later in the month added some color to that when he was talking to Wired and explained that the exact same products that they were showing on ChatGPT, when it was presented as an in-chat checkout versus when it was presented as a link, go to walmart.com to buy it, the on Walmart experience was a 3 times higher conversion rate. And that also gave them upsell opportunities. If you're buying a TV on ChatGPT, maybe Walmart could throw in, here's a HDMI cable, things like that. And that's led to now ChatGPT offering Sparky embedded directly into ChatGPT so that you can access that Walmart experience within the chat.
Awesome. Yeah, it's such an incredibly fast-moving space. And so I just want to kind of double click a little bit on this in-chat checkout change because it's pretty important. And so what ChatGPT was offering was this ability to basically buy within the experience. And so you've got some screenshots here of what that looked like, where you could review a product, then kind of look at basically deciding where it should ship to, what your payment was, and then basically complete that purchase within the app itself. And so we've seen a movement away from that. And it was interesting. Some of the key learnings I think that OpenAI was kind of getting, as well as some of the other retailers involved in the experience, was this desire for people often to be cross shopping or kind of buying more than one thing, as well as people still building trust and confidence within ChatGPT and other AI assistants on when to make that kind of purchase. And so we think this is actually a glimpse of the future of as people build out more trust and build more confidence in AI, we're going to see more of that purchase funnel continue to collapse and especially as agents continue to get stronger and stronger. But so it's kind of important to kind of keep in mind of like this is where we could be heading longer term. But for now, what we've seen is basically a focus still very heavily on shopping like experiences, but just removing that final step of making the purchase within ChatGPT. And so we see these types of screenshots, especially as of, I think it was like last week, where ChatGPT actually kind of upgraded and changed a lot of the UX experience around shopping. But you basically get these categorized picks of products that are kind of aligned to different attributes. So, what's the best overall? What's the best for best premium or Apple ecosystem play? What's the best noise cancellation and comfort example there? In combination with these new comparison grids, which is super interesting, where basically maps out the different attributes and kind of goes beyond maybe what was just listed in these categorized picks and allows you to kind of compare across different products and kind of understand why is ChatGPT recommending these different products and features, as well as then providing the same kind of options on which retailers could you be buying that product from with multiple retailers kind of coming back. And now instead of a buy button, you basically get this visit button to basically go and be able to take action. But this is super powerful and important, especially as we're kind of thinking about how do you improve your visibility within AI. These attributes that AI is kind of defining as being important are really key to kind of pay close attention to, because this is basically what AI thinks is important for the user to be shopping for. So for these, which are kind of generated with just open-ended prompts along the lines of like, what are the best noise canceling headphones? And then AI is kind of coming up with thoughts and recommendations on what it thinks the buyer should care about. So a lot of times that can be aligned, but sometimes that might vary or be different. And we did a quick bit of research over the last week just to kind of look at, okay, what were the primary attributes that AI was recommending and how was it kind of categorizing different products? And we saw quite a lot of variation by category. What's not on this chart actually is in our full report on our website that you can kind of check out is price, budget, that kind of like anything around like the cost was consistent across all categories and very present regardless of what you asked. But then once you got outside of some of those pricing kind of budget type of requests, we basically saw quite interesting variation in which were the different attributes or different things that AI thought was important when someone was considering making a purchase in that area. The other call out that's important to remember here is because we're in AI land, AI models are probabilistic by their nature. There's always slight variations. you do see shopping, not necessarily be a universally triggered experience. So while Will kind of mentioned like kind of how we've seen shopping trigger rates increase, and that's very much for shopping specific questions like what are the best wireless headphones, or can you help me buy some headphones, or can you help me, list some good options to buy for X. Other shopping related questions, like for example, here on the left, where we're asking, are Apple headphones better than Bose? You're not necessarily seeing shopping come back every time. And so the type of prompt you're asking can basically have an influence on whether the user is exposed to that shopping experience or they're kind of showed to, it sounds bizarre to say, but more traditional AI kind of like chat experience. And Will, you did some analysis on how frequently shopping is being triggered. So yeah, we'd love you to take us through this.
Yeah, so like, to reiterate, this is definitely shopper-like prompts. So these are ones where we would expect to see them. But we saw that there are some categories where ChatGPT shopping experience are kind of lagging, and you can see that from February through March in categories like groceries and everyday needs and luxury and lifestyle, those are kind of catching up. So in areas where ChatGPT was low in shopping experiences, those are catching up. But those are still pulling down that 88% number, that 87% number that's still getting pulled down by those categories. You can see for specific categories, a lot of them are already well into the 90 plus percent of the time you ask a shopper like prompt in that category, you're going to get a shopping experience.
And the reason why that's really important then is when you're looking at measuring how frequently shopping is appearing on for your categories and topics and prompts that you're kind of running, the first metric to really kind of make sure you're comfortable and aware of is how frequently are the prompts you're running actually driving the shopping experience. And then within those shopping experience, what's your visibility like? So it's because it's such a very different UX that comes up and kind of different options that come through, it's important to start to look specifically at when that shopping experience is triggered, and how your brand is doing within that, as well as within the broader context of just general visibility and how your brand is turning up in AI answers more generally. So the first stage is to kind of really look at which prompts are driving shopping and how frequently. And then the next is to really look at what are the different products that are being recommended for the prompts that you're running and the topics you're analyzing, to see which of the products are most likely to be recommended, what's the pricing that's coming back, and also the average reviews that are there and being kind of presented as part of that shopping experience. Reviews makes an important part of it. Um, and so with that, Will, you kind of looked quite heavily at, okay, what are the different products that are coming back and what are some of the trends you're seeing there?
Yeah, there was definitely a February to March change for products where there seems to be a bigger catalog, a bigger universe of products that ChatGPT is showing for each category. There was an increase of the number of unique products that were coming back. That's especially true for fashion and apparel and for luxury and lifestyle, those categories that are still kind of catching up in shopping experiences. But you can see also fashion apparel just has a bigger diversity of products in general. So there are certain categories where there's just a lot of different products showing up. That was a bigger change than we saw in retailers. Retailers were a little more consistent February to March, but there were still the upticks in those specific categories like fashion and apparel and luxury lifestyle, where there was a higher number of unique brands where you could go buy that product available within the shopping experience.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of it's kind of similar to what you see in sources tracking and just kind of which URLs are coming back in answers. There's can be quite a large tail on the products, but I think there's some more interesting dynamics that are kind of happening within the retailers. But before we go there, why don't you talk to me a little bit more about which products are shown first?
Yeah, so there is an advantage to being the retailer with the cheapest offer on a particular product. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to be the first one that shows up, but there is an advantage. So what we saw is when you do see that shopping experience pop up and you do see you click on a product and there's the links to buy from, that very first link that shows up, about 60% of the time across all categories, that's the cheapest offer. What we've seen kind of anecdotally is when that is not the cheapest offer first, there's still a little call out that this is the lowest price. So they do emphasize which retailer is the lowest price whenever they're presenting it. And now definitely with that new product comparison, that is a call out, that table that is a call out frequently. It's best budget, cheapest option, something like that to call out this is the best price. So you do get a bit more of an emphasis if your product is associated with being the cheapest one to buy, and then if you are the retailer with the cheapest option for that product. And you can see here some of the typical price ranges for the different categories as well.
And the price ranges is kind of interesting because I think it's definitely true that AI, is good at recording some information, and we've seen basically pricing being an area where AI can quite frequently get it wrong, and so it's an important area to kind of pay attention to as to what are the prices that AI is kind of representing, and is that a straight up hallucination that's coming back, or actually is that just because of there being some erroneous pricing that's maybe out there on the internet that the AI model is kind of putting through. And part of the reason for that is, we do see while the range of retailers isn't quite as long, we do see a number of retailers that is always recommended for each different product. And so there are these different prices, reviews, information that AI is kind of ultimately trying to aggregate up. And so what typically happens is basically when you click on a product within the main chat screen on the left here, then it basically expands these retailer options where you can kind of see a bigger picture of the product, but you can also then just kind of see the different price points for the different retailers. And you can kind of see here it's price, but then also some call out on whether it's in stock, some other kind of meta information that you can basically be making available to AI to kind of make it aware of how that proposition looks. But the interesting thing, as Will called out, price can basically be a driver. Your own D2C offering doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to be at the top. So this is a good example here where for Apple's AirPods Max, Adorama, that's how you pronounce it, are basically coming at the top. But actually Apple was second rather than, you'd argue maybe that they're kind of the most relevant given that's an Apple product. But you kind of see there again, like a slight difference in price that might be driving that. But then here's a good example of where you as the D2C brand did come out on top in this example for Bose. So as ever with AI, there's kind of different probabilities and different weights, which is why it's important you're always looking at the same prompts at scale to get the distribution of answers. But there's some really interesting trends here on how AI is choosing which retailers. So Will, why don't you take us a little bit more through that in a bit more depth?
Yeah, one thing we did see was when it comes to the retails on ChatGPT, there's Walmart, eBay, Target, and then everybody else. Like these three are head and shoulders above everybody else as far as their overall visibility. So this is basically equivalent to our visibility score, except within the population of the shopping experience has popped up. So when a shopping experience popped up on one of our prompts, and more than 4 to 5 times, Walmart had a buy link somewhere in there. 3 out of 4 for eBay, 3 out of 5 for Target, and then everybody else was much lower. So those are definitely the three most visible across all of the categories that we looked at. Then within that, so that's just whether that response included at least one link from that retailer or not. This is looking at out of all of those offer links, all of those places you could go buy the product, what are the shares by retailer? And when actually here you see a lot of consolidation. This is a pretty big contrast to what we see with sources and citations, where no publisher or website has a huge share of the citations that AI looks at. In shopping, there is a big consolidation that appears for most categories. For electronics, for example, almost half of the buy links that you could go navigate to are from just the top 5 retailers. And out of the top 10 retailers per category, for most categories, they have a pretty dominant share of the offer links that are shown. So the buying opportunities, there is some concentration amongst retailers. And you can see in the table on the right, a lot of those top retailers end up being Walmart, Target, or eBay. So those are definitely the three that you want to make sure that your products are visible on.
That's great because I think this is very different to the dynamic that we see within sources. So while there's a good range of retailers, like you can have get into tens, in some cases hundreds of different retailers for the same kind of like categories of prompts. You do see this bigger head, which is something you don't necessarily see in the same way on sources. And so the good news is you can really focus optimization efforts a little bit more than in source optimization, where you want to really cast as wide a net as you possibly can. And so that kind of why it's really important to track like what are the key retailers for different products and for different categories you're kind of looking at. And so here we've got some screenshots from Evertune. This is basically calling out like being able to see the mix of retailers. And the important thing here is, while Walmart, Target, eBay can definitely be in the top, you do see other kind of more mid-market, more niche or specialist merchants that can also kind of pop up and be pretty important to kind of lean into. And then basically just always just kind of keeping an eye on the different price points that are being offered, and just kind of like, yeah, really drilling in, not just at overall topic levels, but also at specific products. Yeah, how is that mix changing or kind of adapting to help shape your strategy? And the reason why you want to do that is actually in terms of taking action and being able to affect your visibility in addition to the regular best practice of getting content out there and kind of making sure you're kind of giving AI as many reasons as possible to be picking your brand or product. There are some unique opportunities within shopping specifically. The first is that OpenAI kind of announced a agentic commerce protocol that's available on their site. I encourage everybody to go and just look at they make the spec completely public. It's a kind of open source initiative in partnership with Stripe. What that does is basically kind of map out a product feed structure that you can actually be submitting directly to ChatGPT. And that's a big deal because actually that's the first time that there's an official front door to get data into ChatGPT's models versus just kind of putting data publicly out there on the internet and kind of hoping it kind of gets scraped and picked up and ingested. And so encourage everyone to kind of look at the Agentic Commerce Protocol from OpenAI, look very specifically at the different fields that are available. And if you are if you have a D2C offering, so this is only available to merchants, then really make sure you're submitting your product feed directly to OpenAI, in addition to working with third parties, which I'll get into in a minute. But some key optimizations that you kind of really be making there around the product titles, descriptions, pricing, as we kind of talked about, is important, as well as you can see in some of the screenshots I showed, like shipping and availability information is also a big factor into what's being shown and how that's kind of ranking. So the agentic commerce protocol is great if you're a D2C brand or you have a D2C offering and you're able to basically push your own e-commerce feed directly into OpenAI. In addition to that, or as an alternative, if you don't have your own D2C brand, because we saw like the breadth of retailers is pretty significant. It's really, it's never just kind of one retailer that's recommended. You also want to be looking at other ways that you can be kind of getting recommended and push through. And so what we've seen is that ChatGPT does seem to be leaning on, or there's a reasonable overlap with a lot of Google Shopping links as well. And so I would highly recommend kind of taking time on and making sure you're kind of looking at your existing Google Shopping feed, again, if you're a D2C merchant. If you are not D2C and you don't have your own product feed, really look at working in partnership with your key retail partners. Understand, are they submitting a feed through the agentic commerce protocol directly to OpenAI, or are they just kind of relying on ChatGPT picking up those product listings either from directly visiting the site or from potentially kind of piggybacking on Google Shopping? Because what you really want to zone in on is basically making it as easy as possible for AI to kind of pick your brand. So looking at the different attributes that might be being used for your category and including as much of that like best for X type of language. So best for noise cancelling, or best for Apple ecosystem integration, or best in terms of design. Really look at how you can be feeding in that type of attribute language into your product listing so that AI is able to really understand where does your product fit within the different products that it's kind of representing to the user as part of those different options. Another great tip as well is also, where possible, to add FAQ content onto your product pages that really align with the prompts that users are likely to ask. So the more alignment you can get on the types of queries that someone's asking ChatGPT for, to then kind of have those mirrored back into what ChatGPT is reading, can help us kind of, again, reinforce that your product listing is the one to kind of be including and kind of be promoting. And then the final area I call out is kind of to be monitoring the reviews across the ecosystem. As there is no necessarily kind of single truth of reviews. And so it's not like AI is just pulling reviews from one source. It's generally kind of looking at reviews from a few different sources and kind of aggregating up. And we have seen there's some relationship. We're doing some more work on just kind of getting the exact causation versus correlation on like review score and how you turn up as well.
And I
So yeah,
want to go back to that slide. We had a question that came up that's actually pretty relevant to this. So, how do you see the agentic commerce protocol changing the dynamic for brands that sell through retailers rather than D2C? So, do you think that retailers will start submitting feeds on behalf of brands that they carry? Like, where do retailers come into play here?
yeah, for sure. Great question. So what essentially we're seeing, especially with like, Walmart, Target, eBay, where there's is very clearly a great relationship, that they're basically submitting their e-commerce feed that includes every product that they kind of have on the site into ChatGPT and basically making that available through the Agentic Commerce Protocol. So the retailers are basically helping to represent all the products that they're selling. And this is where you want to be talking to your retail partners and making sure and understanding what is their strategy for pushing into OpenAI and ensuring like, making sure if it's not the entire catalog, it's basically ensuring your products are being included in that, as well as seeing, what opportunities there are to maybe further optimize your product listing page to be getting that through. So it's a great question because you can see that the third party retailers are a really important part of this overall mix. And while D2C is important, the third parties in aggregate makes more total weight of data that AI is learning from.
We have time for one more question, maybe. Related to the retailer's protocol, what about third parties like Instacart and DoorDash? So is the brand's optimization process the same?
Yes, I would say so. I think it's basically all comes back to like how do you best help AI understand, what's there about your product. And while we focus very heavily on a shopping specific use case now in terms of like which products is being recommended within the shopping experience, as we kind of showed, shopping doesn't always show if that every universe of prompt that could be tangentially related to shopping. So like brand comparisons or product comparisons being a good one. And so the more opportunity and more listings you can get of your product on the internet, that's kind of saying, this is what this product's great for. These are the attributes of where we win. This is kind of where our niche is within the market. The better AI can understand where your product should be fitting in and how that should be kind of turning up for different queries for different users. Because the key thing that we see is how people are asking AI for things is also evolving and kind of moving from very simple prompts to more and more complicated prompts with more context. And you're now seeing AI also suggest more and more attributes or areas or things that people should be considering when purchasing. And so keeping that always aligned with what are the humans asking and then also what's AI recommending and kind of making sure you're kind of building a content strategy for your products that kind of blends both.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Ed. That was so helpful. Thank you, everyone who tuned in and wonderful questions. I really appreciate it. We will be sharing out the deck. We'll share out the recording and looking forward to continuing to do webinars with you all. So thank you, everyone, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.